Okay, when we talk about types of contracts that are testable, we need to talk about sales contracts and option contracts. A sales contract establishes the legal obligations of the buyer and the seller. Sales contract may also be called purchase contract or purchase agreement or offer to purchase or contract for purchase and sale. You'll see it written many different ways, and it just means the contract for the sale or purchase of real estate. A typical sales contract includes the sales price, the legal description of the land, all of the terms and conditions of the agreement between the parties, and any contingencies to the agreement. Now, a contingency allows a buyer to terminate the contract under certain conditions and get a refund of their earnest money. A contingency is a condition that must be met, and if it's not met, the buyer can terminate the contract and get a refund of their earnest money. Most typical contingency is for financing. Remember, brokers are not paid if a sales contract terminates because of a contingency. Sales contracts also include offer and counteroffer. A real estate transaction normally begins when a buyer signs an offer for a seller's property and the offer is presented to the seller. You knew that. The parties are the offeror and the offeree. The seller may accept the buyer's offer, or the seller may change the buyer's offer, which creates a counteroffer. Legally, the original offer has now been rejected and ceases to exist. The seller has rejected the original offer by changing it, by counteroffering. The original offeree or seller now becomes the offeror, and the original offeror now becomes the offeree. With a counteroffer, the seller becomes the offeror, and the buyer becomes the offeree. The buyer may accept or reject the counteroffer, and the parties may continue the process by making additional counteroffers to one another until the parties either reach an agreement or one or more of them walks away from the negotiation altogether. When a seller agrees to accept a signed offer, either the original offer or a counteroffer, and signs it, a valid and legally binding bilateral contract is formed. The seller becomes the vendor who holds legal title until closing. The buyer becomes the vendee and holds equitable title. Equitable title simply means title to the equity. Any equity gained belongs to the buyer. An offer is not considered acceptance until communication of the acceptance has been made to the offering party. Earnest money is a good faith deposit made by a buyer when they make the offer to purchase the real estate. It shows that the buyer is earnest when they make their offer. They're making an earnest offer. That's why we call it earnest money. The amount of earnest money is a matter agreed to by both parties. There is no set amount or rule of thumb with regard to earnest money. It's strictly an agreement by the parties. Earnest money is not required, but it's normally provided. It's customary for earnest money to be placed. To discourage earnest money, what it does is it discourages the buyer from defaulting, and it'll compensate the seller for removing the property from the market. So the buyer places earnest money, and if the buyer defaults for any reason, the seller is compensated. Earnest money is usually given to a broker who holds it for the parties in a designated trust account, unless otherwise agreed to by the parties.